Grid, grid, grid! Gridiron, guys.
Nice.
Now we got Mary Kay Cabot.
Mary Kay Cabot, Cleveland.com. Mary Kay, how are you? Good to see you. What's going on?
I'm doing really well, guys. How's everybody doing?
You know, Mary Kay, I said this morning on my podcast in terms of how we're doing. It's like we were all holding our breath waiting for a decision for months and months. It finally comes on Monday. We all took a breath and said, okay, now we know. And then 2 days later, now we don't know anymore. And it's still even more up in the air than it was before. We have no clue where it's going to go from here. Do you feel that way too?
Well, I really don't think anybody should have had any sense of security after Monday that anything was settled. I mean, we knew that both sides had the opportunity to appeal, and anybody that thought the NFL was not going to exercise its collectively bargained right to appeal was probably in denial. They fought hard for a year.
We were in denial.
They wouldn't accept 12. So, of course, they were going to appeal. It was their right. And, you know, I actually don't blame them for appealing. I think the NFLPA would have done the exact same thing if they weren't going to like the result.
That's true.
At what level, because we prognosticated, there's filing lawsuits, but then there's filing lawsuits, like expansive, wide sweeping lawsuits. I haven't seen the players union, and talking to Jason about this, I haven't seen the players union really exert themselves in that way when it comes to specifically lawsuits. I don't know if the Players Association is willing to go knockdown, drag out. What is your sense on that?
Oh, I think they're definitely willing to go knock down, drag out. Absolutely, 100%. This is an absolute battle between these two entities. And it was one of the perhaps unintended consequences of the reformation of the policy, that it just gets ugly between the NFLPA and the NFL now. And this thing is contentious, and they're both going to fight it out. And I think that they will use all of their resources to get what they want on both sides. For the NFLPA, that means probably suing if they have to. But there's something that can happen before that. That's what I think should happen, and that is that the two sides should get together and negotiate again.
Yes.
Get back to the negotiating table and come up with something that works for everyone.
I would argue that, 12 games has been mentioned. You just mentioned it, got brought up, Mary Kay. In a way, don't you think 12 games is the worst case scenario? Not for Watson, but 12 games is really the worst case scenario for the Browns, because if he's suspended for the whole year, the only good thing about that is that his contract tolls. And so you still have him under team control for 5 years. Whereas if it's 12 games, the season is, in my opinion, sunk. You never know. But in my opinion, it's sunk if it's 12 games. And yet you still really only have him for 4 years. So if you were the Browns down deep, if the suspension was going to be 12 games, would you rather it just be the whole season? Or do you think they wouldn't do that?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a little bit of just ambiguity in the policy about whether or not the contract would toll. And I've been trying to get an answer on this for a long time. In the new policy, the revised policy, it looks to me like there is a distinction between an indefinite suspension and banishment. In the olden days, they were one and the same. If you were indefinitely suspended for a minimum of a year, you were banished from the league and had to apply for reinstatement. Now, the way that I'm reading the policy, and nobody will clarify it for me, at least not yet, is that it seems like there is such a thing as an indefinite suspension and that there is also banishment. So I've been trying to ask, when does the contract toll? When does it not? I know it would in banishment. I don't know if it does in indefinite suspension. So there might be a little wiggle room in that designation. Still trying to figure that out. So it's hard to answer that question until I know the ramifications of an indefinite suspension. But I think the NFL had to come at it from this standpoint. I think they had to come back at it hard and say indefinite for a minimum of a year, because if you're going to sit down and negotiate again, which is what everybody really kind of, I believe, hopes will happen, you can't come in at 12 and hope to end up at 12. You've got to come in at a year and hope to end up somewhere that you can feel comfortable with, and the same thing with the NFLPA.
Mary Kay, it's almost like the NFL keeps that language ambiguous to suit their needs sometimes, doesn't it? Isn't that strange, where they can kind of keep it up in the air?
Well, sometimes there is a little bit of wiggle room in the policy, and I found that out through the whole Josh Gordon saga. I mean, it just always seemed
Yes.
that it wasn't going according to the letter of the policy, and it was always a little bit different than it was precisely written. And so this is a nuance that I'm trying to figure out. And when I do, I'll let you guys know. I'll text Adam or Garrett or something and let you guys know
Appreciate
so
it.
that you can clarify it, tomorrow. But because I think it is an important distinction.
Yes, definitely.
Because you're right, Adam. I mean, if you're going to lose the whole year, and you can toll that to next year, and then you have his rights. It's not just the money; it's
Right.
that you would have his rights for 5 years after a banishment. Then you would probably prefer that over 12 games.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jason.
Mary Kay, okay, so he's out a minimum of 6 and they're appealing. What does this do with his status with preseason games? I was talking to Zach Jackson about it. I said, listen, why don't you play him against Jacksonville? Just because the injury risk is so much less because he's already going to be out X number of games. It's an opportunity to knock off the rust. I know it's a little goofy, and I don't know all the ins and outs with suspensions and appeals and everything else. Is he eligible to play in the preseason? And would you risk it or would you do it just to get him on the field and get a look at him?
Well, once again, it comes down to whether or not he is banished and what the definition of indefinite is right now. Because if he's banished, then that can kick in immediately. And who knows how quickly, that would happen. Let's just say, for instance, the NFLPA, doesn't sue right now. And he is banished from the NFL, that they get this done relatively quickly, and he's banished by the first preseason game. He would not be able to participate in training camp at that point anymore or play in the preseason games. It would be effective immediately, and he would be gone. So that's why I think it is important to try to figure out what the distinction is between the two. Because if he is suspended for a finite number of games, or maybe even the indefinite number, there is a world in which he can still practice through training camp, play in the preseason games, and all the things that come along with that type of suspension.
Mary Kay, do you think I conned myself into believing there'd be no appeal, so I'm conning myself into this too, that maybe the compromise is they either don't add any additional games or maybe only go to 8, but add a massive fine. Is that realistic in any way or no?
Well, I don't think the NFL would have gone to this extent to get 2 more games. I think they're going to try to get more than 2 for sure. And I do think that they want a substantial fine. And there are many different ways that you can work that out. Maybe you take some of the games from last year and add that into the suspension and take some money away from him from last year, so to speak. But I do think that they want him, to hurt a little bit in the pocketbook in this situation. They want some money out of him. They don't want just $57,500 per game for this. Once again, they believe that this is the most egregious violation of the personal conduct policy in the history of the NFL. They want the punishment to reflect that. So they want money to be part of it. Again, I think that Dan Graziano from ESPN had been reporting at one time that they would have settled for 12 games and an $8 million fine. So that tells you where they're going with the financial situation. I think he can expect some kind of fine.
First of all, I think banished is just such a great old-timey medieval word, like it's a witch or something like that we're getting out of our kingdom. But secondly, this will bring up a question. If say this got extended to 12 games or even the whole season, are you comfortable going into the season with old Jacoby and the Josh 1-2 punch, double Josh at quarterback, or are we going to do something about that situation?
I think at that point, they probably would, as an organization, have to put their heads together and really ask themselves if they can accomplish their goals this season, because the rest of the roster is ready to roll. And you have to make sure that you have that position right. And they would have to go back, maybe to the film room and decide, would Jimmy Garoppolo be better than Jacoby Brissett? Or
Yes.
is there anybody else that you can think of that, that would be able to go out there and win these games for you? And so, I don't think we can rule it out. It's not something that's been front burner for them. It's something that they have not really necessarily wanted to do. But they also did not think that the suspension was going to be much longer than 6 to 8 games. And I do believe they felt like they could get through 6 to 8 games and then finish the season off with Deshaun. If he's out for the entire season or 12 games or maybe even 10 games, I do think that you have to revisit it.
Well, Mary Kay, I just thought of a scenario. We was talking about the, what the policy is going to be and what the league is going to say and different things like that. So I was just thinking, what if the NFL Players Association said, you know what, I'm going to apply the old United States of America policy. I don't negotiate with terrorists. So here's what we're going to do. How's about I'm going to sue, and feel free to use this, Players Union. I'm going to sue you for a breach of contract. I'm going to argue that your contract explicitly states that you will hold owners responsible, which is the reason why you did what you did with the Miami Dolphins yesterday. That's a little inside. I'm going to then say I want to file an injunction on a temporary restraining order so that they can't suspend Deshaun Watson. And then what I want to do is I kind of want to go scorched earth. So I kind of want to be like, okay, just to see if the policy was the same, and just to see if the actions are the same, because we're held to the same standard as the owners. I would like to see your information on what you did with Robert Kraft. And can I depose him too? Can I get a statement with him? And if that line of reasoning happens, do you think the NFL would be more apt to apply the 8 games and a fine, or continue with the process?
You know what? I think they will continue with the process. I think that the NFL would feel fairly confident that it can win in court. It won in court with Tom Brady and with Ezekiel Elliott, and they had to serve their suspensions. So if it's filed in New York, they probably will feel very confident about the outcome. And I'm sure the NFLPA will try to file it somewhere where they feel that they'll have a much better chance of winning. But when you're dealing with a corporation, when you're dealing with a private, entities, conduct policies or whatever policies, they will often side with the company. So I do think that the NFL will still proceed. They want to make a statement with this, and they're not going to stop. And the same thing with the NFLPA. The NFLPA, I'm sure, will file the suit.
Mary Kay, a bit of a gray cloud over the Browns fan base as of late. I think we can agree. Not the best party vibe we've got going on. How about just a little bit of positivity? Can you tell us just 1 or 2 positive things that you've seen at camp that have nothing to do with the Deshaun Watson situation and make us all feel better today?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, first of all, just defensively, they have this alpha dog competition going on, and I've been seeing batted passes. I'm seeing these guys try to punch the ball out, try to get interceptions. I think it's just going to be a dynamite defense. They know that they potentially are going to have to go out there and carry the team for a while. Now, I think that's a little bit of an overstatement, because when you have Nick Chubb and you have Kareem Hunt and when you have, David Njoku, Amari Cooper, it's not like, they're all chopped liver over there without Deshaun on the offense. There's still some really, really good offensive players and a great offensive line. But the defense is willing to take this on and carry this team to the extent that it has to. And I think when you look at some of the young guys that have the opportunity to really have amazing second seasons, there's so much reasons for optimism. When you look at Grant Delpit and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Greg Newsome, some of these guys that are just really ready to take off in their second year, I think this is a defense to be feared.
Mary Kay, when you look at Jacoby Brissett, I forgot my question. I'll be totally honest. I was trying to stall for time there because I had a good question. I'm like, remember it? Remember what you were going to ask Mary Kay? I started thinking about what I'm going to talk about next, the Jimmy Garoppolo, and I totally lost my question. So bad job out of me. I'm still stalling to try to make the question.
Do you want me to jump in?
I
got a question.
Can I help?
Damn it, I had a good
saw
question.
Last week you had you mentioned that the Browns initially may have been interested in Russell Wilson.
Yes.
And then Russell Wilson said, hey, I'm not interested in Cleveland, so they pursued Deshaun Watson. How realistic were some of those conversations, and how far did they actually progress?
I don't know how deep they got into that or not, but I just know that was the level that they were aiming for. They were not looking for a Jimmy Garoppolo upgrade. They were looking for Russell Wilson. They were going for Deshaun Watson. They were thinking Super Bowl, and that was where they were going with that. So absolutely 100% they were interested. But Russell, he had designs on where he wanted to go, and, he ended up where he wanted to be.
Mary Kay, I finally remembered my question. Was wide receiver, because you mentioned Amari Cooper. And obviously he's banged up. They've had although it seems like every wide receiver on the team has been banged up in this training camp. We already thought they needed another wide receiver. I know it's early in training camp, but are you surprised they still have not done anything? I mean, should we just be resigned to the fact that they are not going to add a veteran, or at some point might they still?
Well, the thing is right now, here's sort of how they feel. And that is they needed to bring in a couple of camp arms to make up for the guys that got injured. And they've done that. They signed 2 different young guys just to kind of come in, not necessarily to impact the 53-man roster,
right,
but to help them get through this camp. Because, my goodness, Michael Woods and Michael Harley and Jamarcus Bradley are getting way too many reps. So, I think they really feel good about the fact that David will be back, that Anthony Schwartz will be back. He was running some sprints yesterday. Amari looks pretty good. I've always felt that they should add another veteran receiver. There are not that many guys out there right now, but some will shake free in the cuts. So I would be on the lookout for another veteran, because, what would happen if Amari goes down for any length of time? He's pretty much an Iron Man, but you just never know. So I would add another veteran, and I would keep my eyes peeled for one to shake free sometime over the next month.
Mary Kay, great insight as always. I'm gonna get myself out to camp in a couple of weeks. So it'll be good to see you in person. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Mary Kay.
Hey, Mary Kay.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. Always great to chat with Mary Kay.